Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Association of Contingency Planners educational webinar, Custom Building a BCM Program using ISO 22301. I'm Jim Brennan, the Communications Director for the Association of Contingency Planners National Office. The ACP webinar series is sponsored by Continuity Housing, which guarantees pre-negotiated hotel rooms at substantial savings to the critical employees of larger and mid-sized companies in order to help them prevent a business disruption in the event of a crisis. They've created a proprietary guaranteed employee housing program which secures and protects hotel rooms for critical personnel and their families that need it while saving companies significant expenses. Continuity Housing has a 100% success record with their deployment, and each team member has at least 10 years of experience. If you'd like information on receiving a 30-minute analysis on your current housing plan or strategy succession on how to create a plan, visit continuityhousing.com or leave a comment in the survey that will pop up at the end of this webinar. This and all ACP webinars are recorded and available on the Continuity Housing YouTube channel and in the members area of the ACP website. Please feel free to share the link to the recordings with your peers and anyone who might be interested. Now, today's webinar is a live broadcast of the Washington, D.C. chapter's meeting, which is being held at the National Geographic Society in Washington, D.C. ACP appreciates the generosity of National Geographic in hosting today's program. It's a very special event, and as such, we're thrilled to make it available to such a large and diverse audience. ACP National is also very grateful to the DC chapter for offering to present today's webinar to our national audience. And we have a member of the National Geographic staff on hand, and we will hear from him or her right now.
Hey, this is George. Thanks very much, Jim. Komiko Haddon is the facility manager of the National Geographic Society. She's here in the audience, but she asked me to speak to this slide about the National Geographics and to say simply that the Association of Contingency Planners is very grateful for the use of the facility for today's presentation on custom building a business continuity management system using ISO 22301. I think it's important to note that the National Geographic is now working on a management system, and perhaps more on that later. Back to you, Jim.
All right, thank you, George. And today's presenters are the gentleman from whom you just heard, George Huff, along with Maureen Roskowski. George is the founder and director of consulting for the Continuity Project LLC and a member of the ACP National Board of Directors. George is a member of the DC chapter as well. Maureen Roskowski is Senior Professional Corporate Sustainability Officer at Facility Engineering Association, where she focuses on energy and sustainability in existing facilities, helping them achieve greater energy efficiency and operational excellence. And now, to formally get the program underway, I return things to George and Maureen to begin the program.
Thank you very much, Jim. Hello, everyone. I'm here at the National Geographic. We're in a beautiful room having a very remarkable lunch meal at the which is the member sponsor at each of the ACP monthly meetings here. We're overlooking a garden courtyard, and I think it's a delightful place to convene, and it's great to be here once again. Before we go forward, I'd like to speak a word about the Continuity Project that Jim touched on in his introduction of me a few moments ago. That the Continuity Project focuses exclusively on business continuity management and disaster response and preparedness and organizational resilience. We're a new organization. We customize our solution by industry, including the practice of law. I've helped take the American Bar Association from scratch through accredited certification to ISO 22301, and I'm introducing to them new software for the management system. We address the needs of the business environment, and we're able to deliver services worldwide. And I think in part one of the reasons that I was able to get involved in this particular area was because ACP itself supported my development of ISO business continuity related standards. So I was able to participate in the project teams all over the world to write the standards that we're now going to be learning about today. This year and last, I was asked to serve as the Business Continuity Fellow for NIST's Community Resiliency Program, which I think is a neat connection to make in business continuity. So the continuity project's approach, we focus exclusively on BCM, and our consultative approach is based on the leading standards, as I mentioned before, including ISO 22301 and DRI's and BCI's professional practices, which we're all familiar with here. Again, we participated in the development of ISO 22317, the Business Impact Analysis, which was published in 2015, and as you'll hear today from Maureen, we were one of the first organizations in the world to use this particular business impact analysis, and you'll hear more about that today. So we focus on a collaborative approach and working with all levels of management and others in organizations to design a solution that makes good business sense for both business and financial project analysis. So that's a little bit about our organization and our approach. Today's agenda, I think you'll find interesting because I've been wanting to do this for a long time, which is to describe a case study of an organization that actually goes through the current ISO 22300 series of management systems and guidance and technical specifications, so that you can see and hear how the actual results of this development projects, these standards development projects are working. So there are 5 points we're going to touch on today for today's presentation. And first of all, I think, is the business case for accredited certification. Now, organizations typically will develop a business case before they invest in a management system, whether it's business continuity or quality or others. So we want to touch about on the business case. Secondly, the relationship with the business continuity consultants, which we do here, most of us present today and online are consulting in the area of business continuity. So I want to touch on that. And now the selection of the standards that are interesting to us, 22301, of course, the Business Continuity Management System Standards Requirements, which are the auditable standards, and then the guidance standards, which are 22313. We wrote the 22301 to be 24 pages. The guidance standard is 48 pages and mostly has strategy options. Some organizations really like to use guidance to do their alignments because there's a lot more should and may specifications in there to help you align your organization. I want to touch today also on business impact analysis and guidelines for exercises, and finally we'll just say a few words about our good practices and professional practices. I want to touch on how facility engineering associates went through their program setup, through program development, maturation, and assessment, and finally we'll talk about how you should maintain your relationship with a registrar or a certification body, not only selection, but also year to year, using that registrar to help you build continuity within your organization and have that important link to top management. So this is our agenda, and it describes FEA's sequence of moving through to accredited certification. I think you'll find that everyone in this room knows here at ACP DC chapter that business continuity adds value and improves performance. And that's been documented not only with respect to management system standards, but business continuity, not only international standards, but also in a PA 1600 provides that improving performance that adds value. So I think the certification, which is what we're talking about today, can add value, but even more importantly, by leveraging standards, this will contribute to improve performance in most cases, and adopting standards without certification really can give you 3 areas. You can maintain focus, you can manage your risk, and integrate processes. So listen in today. I think certification is something not all organizations choose to do. Maybe 1 in 5, 1 in 10. We're seeing more and more organizations that are choosing accredited certification. A point that I think is important to touch on, as I mentioned in the agenda, is a business case for ISO 22301 certification. In other words, is certification right for your organization? Is it a right fit? You've probably seen some benchmarking studies out there. BCI and QA have done them. ISO itself has done them. ANAB, I'm a participant in ANAB. We've looked at these. But typically the key drivers that cause an organization to choose certification will revolve around assurance of continuous services to customers. Products and service delivery is what drives many organizations to choose accredited certification, to make that buy, to make that investment, to make sure that those deliveries continue to occur even in the result after a disruptive event. Of course, reduced risk of business interruption. We're talking about that a little bit before lunch, but risk of business interruption is an issue, and connected closely with that are protecting reputation and brand. It doesn't take much to taint brand. If you've got an outage of a period of time, it can be a couple of days outage can cost some organizations a couple of $1 million of expenses, and we've talked about that before. Greater resilience against disruption, getting new business. I don't know how often I've heard people say that, hey, we were ISO certified, we worked really hard for that, and we've had a lot more sales, we've had to add people to our program because we're getting new business. And enhanced expertise in ISO standards, I think, is another key plus in terms of why it makes sense for an organization to decide to choose certification. Certification is really an objective measure of preparedness, and it indicates the organization's dedication to quality, and it drives performance. So seeking certification to an international management system, think in terms of a business case. Sometimes organizations ask me about their business cases, and I take a look at them, and I'll typically see these kinds of indicators of why they've decided to take the step toward ISO certification. Your relationship with a business continuity consultant. Now, most of us out there, as I've said, are consulting or working with organizations, and so I've just posited here maybe 4 reasons why organizations with in-house business continuity professionals seek external business continuity consultants. And the main reasons, I think, are that it gives them more flexibility. It can save time. If you bring in somebody experienced, it saves cost on training staff. Typically, when I work with organizations, I can mentor the organization and attest to the competence of an individual who's worked with me for some time, and I can say their level of competence. Typically, I urge people involved in business continuity to seek continuous education and simply align with the good practices. So experience of working in an industry is a good idea. Your own industry is a good idea to bring somebody in who's got some fresh eyes on the issues, can take a look at what's going on inside the organization and advise with them. So, you've heard it from me, but there's an ISO standard on just about everything, and there's even an ISO standard on this, which I've listed here on the slide deck. How to select quality consultants and use their services. And I think that's important to do. So a couple of organizations that I've worked with here and continue to do so, American Society of Civil Engineers and the American Bar Association. Let's take a look at the selections of International Business Continuity Management System standards. I was fortunate to be on the project team for each of these standards. We finished 22301 and 13 in Bogota, Colombia toward the end of 2012. So this standard has been out for a while. We'll probably see at the next meeting of the ISO Technical Committee ISO Technical Committee 292, which is going to meet again in Boston in April. We'll probably look at revisions of of the cycle for 22301 and 13. The next standard that I've listed up here in terms of chronology is guidelines for exercises. That's 22398. We did use that at Facility Engineering Associates to design the exercise project and to put in place the exercise program. There's a lot of good content in there. I know it's abbreviated, it's short, concise, and simple content. So you'll be surprised when you look at these standards because they are really they're very concise and they're very useful. I was involved in writing business impact analysis. So you'll hear more from Maureen Roskowski today about business impact analysis and how we implemented it in 2015. It went final in around April or May. It wasn't published until September, so we're working off a draft of the standard when we're putting it together. It's really hot off the press. Supply chain continuity is one that we also finished in Morioka, Japan this month, last year. So these two standards we just came to their conclusion. For critical suppliers, supply chain continuity is a very good standard. And when you begin to look at an organization's suppliers and supply chain, it's helpful to have that reference handy. The last standard on this page is ISO 17021-6. It's one of a series of conformity assessment standards that we worked on in order to really bring up the standards of auditing in this particular profession. We wanted really top quality auditors. One of the big issues that you'll find, starting in a new discipline like this, you may find that when it's time to hire an auditor, you want somebody that's really capable. So this standard is the standard currently internationally for the competence of auditing and certification of management systems. So keep in mind this if you are asked to measure the quality of an auditor. We're familiar with these. I guess if I ask for a show of hands in this audience of people that have been through the DRI professional practices, I might get some hands up in the air. So, there are 10 professional practices. This is basic stuff, but we go through this, and so it's probably a good idea to review the 10 professional practices as a part of program setup. Business continuity good practice from Business Continuity Institute. Any members of BCI here? Yeah, some more hands going up for that. So yeah, BCI is a pretty good benchmark globally for good practice. Here we're looking at about maybe 93 and 103 pages or so. You probably know the author of the standards, but it's good. It's broken down here. I just summarized it, things the life cycle management practices, life cycle technical practices for good practice standards. Methods of certification. The standard requires a couple of methods, or provides for a couple of methods of certification. One is first-party self-certification or conformity. Yes, I'm just ask me, I'm certified. Some people think that's a good way to go. Some choose a maturity model. That's available to you out there. You can get your organization posted as one that has completed the maturity model, and ANAB will disseminate that. I think the lodestone, the core, is third-party certification by an accredited certification body. So I'm a proponent of it. I think it's a good idea, but not all organizations are willing to do the invest in year one to go there. Some want to go a little slower and stair-step the approach. Maybe doing a BIA 1 year, maybe looking at their risk and looking at some of the other aspects of program setup without fully getting involved in certification. I promised to talk about a relationship with a registrar, how to select a registrar or certification body. You're probably aware that to get accredited in a registered organization has to meet a number of exacting requirements. And I showed the requirement for ISO standardization of audit competency. But this slide touches on a couple of 6 points here. And one is an abbreviation, the IAF, which is the International Accreditation Forum. Now this forum is in Geneva also with ISO, and it sets the standards for accreditation bodies globally. So in the United States, of course, you have ANAB, which I'm on the board of, ANAB. It's an ANSI organization that is the U.S. accrediting body for certification bodies. Now you'll see UCAS in the United Kingdom, you'll see a different one in Australia, in the Far East, all around the world you'll find accreditation bodies. And their responsibility is to certify, is to give certification to bodies that want to hold themselves out as qualified auditors. And they're called CBs. So what you're looking for is a competent, qualified auditor to certify within your industry. So it could be, I think there's some 9,001 qualifiers in this room today, and the others in aerospace. NASA has a big program. Is there any from NASA here? NASA? Okay, so NASA, I think you've got an ISO 9001 aerospace, about one of the only government organizations that has that continuing certification, if I'm correct. So that's something that you look at. You look at reputation. An organization getting started should look at several CBs and get their fees for their entire certification project. Usually it's on a 3-year cycle. So it'll give you an idea of what your initial invest will be to develop a management system. Also keep in mind the number of hours that you're going to expend in year 1 in a management system, and then maintaining that investment in year 2 and beyond. You ought to consider the dispute resolution that you have for any differences of interpretation that you'll see during an audit. Some people want to call you out on a particular area. Push back, because you need to express yourself, and if you do, you'll find some flexibility. The registrars want to work with you. And the caution of the last bullet here is cheapest could be more costly in the long run if auditor is below standard. So, and perhaps enough on that. You're not selecting an auditor, you're selecting a business partner, because that auditor is going to be back in year 2. The auditor is going to know what went on in year 1, and the auditor is going to ask about improvement plans, corrective actions, and that's exactly why you're paying the auditor. So select a registrar, somebody that you can work with. At this stage, I'm going to turn it over to Maureen Waskowski, and she's going to tell you about Facility Engineering Associates. Maureen?
Thanks, George. So yeah, I wanted to give you an overview of our process, how we went through certification to the ISO standard, and just to give you the background on FEA and who we are. We're an engineering and facility management consulting firm that focuses in on existing buildings, and the graphic you see over there shows the variety of services that we provide as it relates to the life cycle of the facility. And a lot of the work we do is based on operations improvement. We do organizational assessments, and that often includes business continuity planning, emergency preparedness, looking at facility management processes, policies, and procedures. And so we wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that in business continuity planning, and we thought, what better way to immerse ourselves in this than to go through a major effort like an ISO certification. Took on a major project like this to get that additional insight and enhance our capabilities for our customers in that area. We are a small business. We have about 50 employees. We have 3 main offices: Fairfax, Denver, and Santa Rosa, California. We decided to pursue certification officially for the Fairfax office only, and to work on alignment to the standard for the other 2 offices. So I was the lead for this project, which was a very significant internal project for us, and I became our business continuity lead for the company. Next slide. So here are the major clauses of the ISO standard, and sounds like many of you are already familiar with this standard. So we've focused in on 4 through 10. The context of the organization, looking at internal and external issues that are relevant to us. Leadership, demonstrating commitment to this at the senior level. Planning, including looking at risk appetite and our overall strategy. Support, what are the resources that we have dedicated to this, and what are the competencies of the folks that are working on the project and that are our major key roles in business continuity and emergency preparedness. Section 8, the operations, including the BIA and risk assessment. Section 9, looking at the performance evaluation, measurement, and monitoring to look at the success of your program and your management system. And then lastly, the improvement, addressing the nonconformities and how can we continually improve our process. So instead of kind of going clause by clause, and you can go to the next slide, George, I wanted to cover with you how we took those clauses, took the certification, and set up a program that included major milestones and go through some of the major work that we did. Next slide, please, George. So this is kind of how we laid it out. Again, we took the standard and said, okay, these clauses are great, say a lot of stuff. How do we put that into a process that we can go through? This is about a year-long project for us. It started with the basics of setting up our program. We needed to set up a policy, set up structure. Then we needed to go through and do a business impact analysis and figure out what are the key things that are going to be impacted and how can we prepare so that we can continue our business. What are the risks associated through a comprehensive risk assessment? We needed to set up business continuity and emergency preparedness procedures. We were pretty much starting from scratch in our organization. And then we needed to do training, testing, and exercising of those procedures that we just put together. And then we needed to go through the process of certification. And then after this is the performance evaluation and monitoring. And so as of yesterday, actually, we are officially certified. We just reached that milestone to achieve the certification. And so looking back now, thinking about where we were, where we started, again, we started about this time last year, so about a year project for us. And next slide, please. Like I said, we were starting from scratch, so we needed to set up a program. And the very first thing we needed to do was to develop a policy. And the policy really was the foundation, which set the commitment of our organization. And although we decided to only pursue certification for the Fairfax office, the policy covers our whole organization. So we wanted everyone to be involved. We wanted the other two offices to align to the certification. So we needed to set everything up across the company. We put in place a structure that you can see a little snapshot from here. That was our governance model. We created a task force that met every 2 weeks to set up our programs, our policies, and to meet. And that task force was set up of people across the organization. So we had senior leaders, we had our service line leaders, we had human resources, accounting, etc., trying to get a broad range of people to be part of that. We set up the team structure, and we did gold, silver, and bronze team. And we found out early on that we needed to identify our teams and our roles early in the process, because those roles appear in several of your documents. So we needed to make sure we did this early on so that we were consistent in our documentation. And we wanted to make everyone at FEA part of a team. So the gold team was the authorizing level. The incident commander, they were the folks that would authorize actions. The silver team was our tactical level. They were the ones that would implement actions. And then our bronze team was everyone else. So that if you weren't part of a specific team where you had a tactical duty, or you weren't part of the gold team, then you were on the bronze team, and your job was to continue business as usual. So it was important to us that everybody was involved and that everyone had a place in the process. Next slide. So the first major item we did after the policy and program setup was the business impact analysis. And this involved interviewing people at FEA across all our departments, both our service lines, our human resources, finance, IT. The goal was to identify what were the key inputs and outputs of each department. So once we determined that, then we broke those down into processes we follow to produce that output and the steps so we could determine what is critical to us continuing our business. And that was one of the challenges. This BIA process makes a lot of sense and is really easy to think about if you think about a production, somebody who makes widgets, and you need to think about each part that goes into your widget and what do you need to do for each part, so therefore how do you make sure that you can continue to work. When you're asking someone like our finance department, what does it take for you to process an invoice? What does it take for you to deposit a check? It really gets tough to try to get people to sort of change their mindset of thinking about this. And one of the things we found was that the more we asked questions, the more we probed deeper, we found that although our technology helps us out and makes things more efficient, if it came down to it, we could do most things by pen and paper for a while until our systems got back up and running. So it was a very good process to go through, challenging at times, but definitely gave us some good core input to really think about what we needed to do in terms of policies and procedures. Next slide. So then the next step was to look at, take the business impact analysis and take the key findings from that. What were the top priorities we found out of that? And what are the risks associated with those? So we looked at the risk assessment in terms of 4 key areas: the loss of facility, what happens if we can't get into our physical space, the loss of personnel, if we lose key personnel, having redundancy in place, having knowledge and succession plans, loss of communications, our ability to communicate with each other, if we lose phones, if we lose email, even if we lose cell phones. And one thing that many of us learned, probably you guys in the DC area there, when the earthquake that hit down in central Virginia but was felt all the way up the East Coast, was that when the cell towers went down, signals were jammed. You couldn't call people, but you could text people. And texting has become a lot more common now. And so that was one thing we looked at, is how many of our employees have text ability, how many would like to use that. And we found that many of our employees, instead of getting emails or phone calls on emergency situations, really wanted to have text sent to them. And that may end up being the more reliable system anyway. And then the other thing we found was that the type of work that we do, we're a consulting firm, and we spend a lot of time out in the field, and then we come back and we spend time analyzing data, creating deliverables. So we don't need our physical space that much. We found that we could probably go a couple weeks without a physical space. People can work from home. We tested out the functionality. We have a commitment to sustainability in our company, so we already had in place a working from home alternative commuting policy. So people were already set up to work from home. So that was something that we found, that the physical office space is good, but we could live without it for a couple weeks while we got set up somewhere else. Next slide. And then really, for me, what I felt was the meat of the business continuity plan was the procedures. Identifying specific procedures for evacuation, for shelter in place, what we would do and when we would do each of those items. Outlining clearly, for an earthquake, we take cover, we don't evacuate. For fire, we evacuate. Identifying who will order the evacuation and roles for those that will monitor the evacuation and know that everyone got out. So one of the best outcomes for us from this process was our Safety First document. And that was a document that specified all of these emergency procedures for our Fairfax office. It's something that is tangible. It's something that everyone could relate to. And everyone got a copy of this. And it's something that we have practiced in our drills as well. And kind of a silly thing maybe, but one of the things that we found was that we needed to have a more formal sign-in, sign-out policy. We had a sign-out process, so we would know if people were out and when they were due back. And that was primarily for a communication standpoint. If clients called in and needed to get us, that we had some idea of when they might be able to get a hold of that person. But what we weren't good at was signing in. So if if we had to evacuate the Fairfax office, and given that many of us travel and we're out in the field, our facility manager wouldn't know who was actually in the office that day to know if everyone safely evacuated. So we needed to implement that kind of policy. So we set up a process for everyone to sign in, and it was challenging at first, but everyone has really come around to that, and we now feel like we have a much safer environment. Next slide, please. So after we set up all those policies, procedures, we wanted to test them. And part of the requirements of the certification is that we do this. So we did one major tabletop exercise where we ran, as George said, aligned with that standard, a FEMA level tabletop exercise, looking at a hurricane that was coming to the office. And we hosted it out of our Fairfax office, but had, much like today, a line open, a web meeting open so that all of our offices could participate. And we went through our plan, and we did a mock drill of, we actually had people in our Fairfax office when we decided to activate the plan. And our first step in our plan is that if we have an issue with our physical space, that everyone will work from home. Instead of sending everyone home for the day, we sent everyone to an adjacent building conference room that we had access to, and said, okay, go work over there. And we kept the line open and communication open with them as we walked through all the procedures in our plan. So a big thing we tested there was the communications plan, and how would we communicate to people? How would they know when and what to do? And we had the Fairfax County emergency management folks participate in this exercise with us. And one of the suggestions that they had was that we add to our communications plan that we would contact people at a specific time every day. So that when we sent out our first communication, we would say, okay, we're going to contact you at noon tomorrow for an update. So that way, if people were trying to save power and batteries and things like that, that they could only turn on their electronics at that time to receive an announcement. So we got really good feedback from our personnel through that process, and one of the greatest feedback we got was they said, we want more. We want more training, more events. So we set up situational awareness training. We had other local authorities came in. We had the police officer came in and talked about what would we do if there's an active shooter. We set up lunch and learns, and this really helped engage people within this entire process. And since the auditor was going to talk to people on all levels, that they knew the process, they knew our plan, this was really important to get everyone engaged. Next slide. So the clause that relates to performance evaluation really focuses in on the monitoring, measurement, and overall evaluation. And we set up tables identifying all the things we said we would monitor. And when you think about, you've got your safety first document, you've got your emergency preparedness, you've got a lot of information in your business continuity plan. There's a lot of things that we said we would continually monitor, or that we would do annually or semi-annually, or whatever the case was. So we put everything in a chart and said, okay, here are all the things we said we would monitor. Here's who's going to do it. Here's who it's reported to, and here's the time frame that it's monitored. And this was really helpful because the auditor did tell us that when I come back next year, I'm not only checking all the ISO requirements, but I'm checking everything you said you would do. So any additional things you put in your plan that you were going to do, I'm going to check to make sure you did that. A few other key points were the internal audit that was done, and we utilized an in-house, we utilized our controller, our accounting, as our internal auditor, and he went through on his own and looked at where we might want to improve or if there were any nonconformities. And then the management review is an annual meeting that we take to management, summarize what's gone on for the year, did we identify any nonconformities, what are some improvements we can make, and really a great way to have that ongoing conversation with senior management. And for our first year, that was really important because it kept them engaged in the process. Next slide. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, the continual improvement. Looking at any nonconformities or corrective action. And for us, going through it for the first time, we actually did very well, did not have very many nonconformities to look at, but we set up a corrective action process that really does looks at the root cause analysis and tries to figure out why, if there are nonconformities, why did they occur, and make sure that they don't happen again. And then through our process of our task force and the really high-level engagement we have with our senior leadership, we are working on continual improvement. So now that we've got our certification, we have improvements that we're making to our business impact analysis and risk assessment process to make that a little bit more seamless so that those two really flow well and fit well together. And then we'll look at where we are when the auditor comes in to do his annual check for us. Next slide, please. So out of all this whole process, what did we learn? No surprise to you in the audience, but documentation, documentation, documentation. With any ISO certification, there's a tremendous amount of documentation. So this is a good thing. We now have procedures for many types of emergencies that might happen. We have, I mentioned the earthquake, bomb threats, all kinds of things we have a procedure now for. We have much more clearly documented procedures even for things like office closings, and employees have a much clearer picture about what to do when an emergency happens and who is in charge. The relationships with the local authorities has been extremely valuable for us. Not only does it help engage our employees, but we had those local authorities review our Safety First plan. They participated in our exercises, so their feedback was really crucial for us, and they were thrilled that somebody asked them to come out and do this with them. And then the challenge and lessons learned is really to balance the detail with ease of use. So the level of detail that is required to meet the standard sets up plans that are not necessarily user-friendly. So we have a giant business continuity plan that meets all the requirements of the standard, sets us in a really good place, but not really something that every single person in the company can use. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked for cheat sheets or a one-pager, something simplified that can be more user-friendly that people can have at their desk, have readily available. So that's kind of our next step, now that we've gotten all the full documentation in place, to look at how can we now create simplified documentation that can be more readily used by our employees. We also need to look at continuing and formalizing our process of who's going to have what documentation, what format are we going to have it in, are we going to all wear the little flash drives around our necks, how are we going to make sure that we have the access to all this information that we've provided. So that's our story. That's how we went through it, and I'm happy to answer any questions when we're finished with the webinar about our story and our process. So George, with that, I think I turn it over to you next.
Yes, thanks, Maureen. A great summary. I appreciated covering that, all that we did in 1 year's time in a quick slide deck. I'm happy to say that the online audience is staying with us, and we've got nearly 90 people online, so welcome to you online. A word about our relationships, about the Continuity Project. We have strategic partners and clients with global organizations around the world, and we are working with now smaller firms in expanding markets. And our partners represent clients in nearly all the industries, including facilities management, which Facilities Engineering Associates is an FM organization. We're proud that since 2011, I have served as an elected member of the Board of Directors of ANSI-ASQ, the National Accreditation Board, as I mentioned before. Some of our clients maintain established, proven preparedness programs, and others are just beginning to address business risk associated with disruptive events. So I've listed here some of the current relationships that we have. ABA, for example, as I mentioned, they're using Catalyst Pro software, which I'm reselling, and the American Society of Civil Engineers, Association of Contingency Planners, which is this organization, BCI, IFMA, and the Society of American Military Engineers. So a lot of interest in this. This is our guarantee. We guarantee our work to the complete satisfaction of the client. If a client is not satisfied, we will at client's option either waive professional fees or accept a portion of those fees that meets the client's level of satisfaction. Last slide is going to be our questions, and for this purpose, I'm going to hand it back to ACP National and Jim to take us on to some questions.
Okay, thank you, George. First one is, how long did the BIA process take?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Maureen, do you think you can speak to that?
Yeah, I would say that it probably took us about 2 to 3 months to complete.
Now, I would chime in on that, and the reason why is that I think in looking at the BIA, we had a choice of using a qualitative or quantitative BIA method, and we chose the qualitative method involving gathering the data by survey instrument and interview. And we found that going through this ISO standard for the very first time and using a qualitative methodology, we wanted to make sure that we were covering everything. So we needed to develop data gathering instruments and including survey instruments in order to get right the process. And that included also going back and with follow-up questions. And so I think if it's fair to say that we could probably complete it a little more quickly on the second time through, but we did it right the first time by taking it slow and following each step of the standard. What do you think, Maureen?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. And, you know, there are improvements that we're looking to make to that process to streamline it a little bit, to be able to collect that information. And like I said, I think the challenging part was, well, one for us is that you're needing to get people's time. We needed a couple hours in the initial interviews to go through all that detail with them. And so part of that time frame is just getting on everybody's schedule so that you can have a dedicated time set to meet with all those different departments.
Great. Jim, what else?
Okay, a couple of follow-ups while we're still on this topic. How many questions were asked in the BIA?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Go ahead, Maureen.
I don't know the exact count of questions, but we really looked at specifically what are the inputs required for your work, what are the outputs of your work, and what are the key resources that are needed for those. And so we had a set of questions that we asked each of the departments, and then based on that did our first run of the analysis of the data, and then came back to them to get further detail. Because we really found that the amount of detail that you want to get to, it's hard to do in one chunk. You kind of need to take it into pieces and work through it with people. And again, like I said, for some of our departments, this was really difficult for them to kind of shift their mindset away from, you know, just what they do on a daily basis, but breaking that down into very, very specific processes and steps was challenging to work with people and to shift the mindset into that way.
It's important to note, too, I think, that what we're looking at in the BIA are the activities that support the product and service deliveries. And that's a process. So each of the individuals we were speaking to, service line leads, maybe finance and budget, have discrete requirement of activity that is unique to them. And it takes a little bit of prying to see the interactions and what the relationships are, both internally and externally. Jim, any more questions?
Yes. Was the BIA survey instrument an automated application or spreadsheet?
We did everything in person. I think given the size of our company and the ability to engage with people, the survey instrument George is mentioning is really that second analysis that we did. It wasn't like a survey that we sent out to people. It was our first analysis of that data and then sending it and discussing it with people to dig into a deeper dive.
Okay, we have another one here which I think speaks to that same question. A couple asking about when the webinar recording will be available, and let's just do a little business here. It will be available to the ACP members, archived on our website in the members section. That will happen probably within the next day or so. George, could you speak to other places where the will be accessible?
Yeah, I'll be looking forward to the webinar. If I may, I've got a question from the floor here at from one of our DC chapter members with a question.
I was wondering, do you incorporate in a threat analysis when you're doing all of your assessment processes, depending on the customers that your company is supporting?
Hey, this is George. I'll speak to that, and then Maureen. Of course, as a part of the BIA, we quickly included a risk assessment or threat assessment. We looked at the universe of threats and used a rating scale to determine their criticality and severity likelihood. So we not only did we do that for the Fairfax office, but also the I think we invited the California and Denver offices to take part in that. Maureen, what am I missing?
Can you repeat the question, George?
The question is, did FEA conduct a risk assessment or threat assessment?
Threat analysis.
Or threat analysis?
And yeah, we definitely did the risk assessment and looked at the specific threats that would come that would be relevant to us, and then we prioritized the risks as based on frequency and severity. Is that what you're referring to?
Oh, yeah. Depending on the types of customers you may support, what threats they may be exposed to, physical threats as well as cyber threats, to do a threat analysis based on the capabilities of known threats or perceived threats.
You have to repeat, George.
Yeah, I think the question has to do with risk and threat analysis. And our approach to this was to do a typical risk assessment and then translate those risks after we prioritize them into the risks that affect facility function or access, the risks that deal with loss of personnel, loss of data, and I think those were the primary business risks that we came up with as a result of our BIA internally. I think the question had to do with, are we looking at the risk and threats that support our external suppliers? And maybe that's what you were asking.
Enemy, your exposure to external threats to your business by any of the people you have associations with. When we talk about threats, I'm talking about physical threats, enemy players, terrorists, cyber threats, those kinds of threats.
Yeah, we looked at discretely at more than 100 threat types per location, and then asked members of the organization to determine within those lists of threats the ones that would be likely for that organization, and then the severity of them by location. Okay, Jim, back to you.
What tool do you use to input/store the BIA?
The question is, what tool did we use to input? We did a template for inputting the answers to the questions during the interviews, a template sheet which is expandable, and it served us well. I know some organizations do this using an application, but we did it manually in year one.
All right, since you conducted a qualitative BIA, did you have senior management set the values of the ranges of HML?
Could you get a little more clarity on the question, or maybe Maureen could help that?
Well, yeah, you might have to tell me what HML stands for, but I can tell you that one of the auditor's findings in our first stage 1 audit was that we needed to have a better process for incorporating a corporate priority to our BIA and our risk assessment. So we had gone through each department and talked to them about what were their priorities and looked at their processes and how it fits overall and came up with priorities, did the risk assessment, came up with our own priorities. But, you know, if all of our level 1, basically the question he asks is, are all of our level 1 priorities the same? So is there a corporate level priority that would say this level 1 trumps that level 1? And so that's part of the improvements that I'm mentioning to our BIA and risk assessment process to bring in that corporate level ranking so that we're not just getting the department's feedback, but the corporation itself can say, this is what our priority is. And if it ever had to come down to we had to choose one or the other in terms of relevance and priorities, we would have that data there. Does that answer the question?
Maureen, the HML refers to high, medium, and low.
Oh, it sounded much fancier than that.
We had that. We had a rating like that, ranking.
Yeah, we did basically a 1 through 4 level ranking and defined each level what it meant.
All right, next is what sort of reports are produced to make sense of the BIA? The BIA collects a lot of information and sometimes it's unwieldy. What kinds of reports do you produce to make sense to the executives?
That is a great question because we did find that between that and the risk assessment that we needed to be able to take that data, summarize it so that folks could understand it. And the BIA was one of the harder ones to put into plain language. So what we focused in on this first year, was to summarize the outputs of the BIA in terms of the highest priority functions that came out of that. And then we took that and did our recovery time objectives and our other metrics associated with that and presented it to the senior management at that level without going through all the detail. The report is there. If anyone wanted to look at it, they could find the detail, but really rolled everything up to that higher level. And I think the addition of this corporate rating is really going to enhance that and allow the senior level to see it from a much bigger picture.
Okay, are the threat assessments collected at the BIA level, the strategic level, or both? Are the assessment items driven from the top first?
I think,
so,
go ahead, Maureen.
I was going to say we really did this from the bottom up. So the priorities and threats were looked at from the department level and then pushed up to the senior level instead of the senior level pushing it down to us. And that may be because, you know, we were starting from scratch. Senior level management didn't have something already in place that they were pushing down onto our different departments. So we kind of went the other way, looked from the bottom up and then rolled it up into the senior level. George, anything to add to that?
Yes, I would add one thing to it, and that is that much of the content of the BIA had to do with gap analysis and gap closure. And that may have been as valuable as developing the business continuity strategy that Maureen has just described. We find that the gap analysis probably, you know, changes the org chart in some way of the organization, but it also changed not only began to change the culture of the organization, but it began the top management to think in terms of different categories, and Maureen has touched on them somewhat, such as signing in, carrying your laptop home at night, being prepared to work from home in a little more robust way and a more formalized manner. More questions, Jim?
Yeah, to what level of detail did the BIA drill down? That is, function/process level.
It was an activity level BIA rather than a process level BIA, as I mentioned before. Because of the size of the organization, a smaller organization, we were able to drill down very closely and focus on each of the job descriptions of each individual in the Fairfax office. Maureen, anything on that?
Yeah, I think that sums it up.
What else, Jim? How are we doing?
Okay. How specific are you on your list of threats? For example, do you do a risk assessment for earthquake rating 5 to 6, earthquake 7, earthquake 8, earthquake 9?
We didn't get into the earthquake levels or hurricane levels. We simply identified as hurricane or other threat, and rather than focus on severity. We would probably do that if we were looking at resiliency of buildings, but we were simply looking at threat to facility and the other threats that we are concerned with, the outcome being business risks such as loss of supplier.
And can you, what again is corporate rating?
So one of the findings through the certification audits was that the BIAs and risk assessments didn't have an overall relationship to a corporate priority. So are all our level 1 priorities the same? And they encouraged us to include some way of looking at a corporate level priority, so that the overall organization, senior leadership, could look across the departments and say, this level 1 priority exceeds this one. So because we were already kind of set up with the risk assessment and BIA rankings on a 1 to 4, we've adjusted our process so that after the BIA and risk assessment are done at the department and the task force level, that we would then take it to the senior leadership and ask them to do a corporate level ranking, and then that ranking would get included in the calculation, so that there could be an additional level of corporate level priority added to our overall rankings.
Okay, and the last one I have here is a two-parter actually. How long did the planning take for the TTX, and how many resources were involved with the planning and in the actual TTX?
That's a good question. The planning for the tabletop exercise probably took, I don't know, a month or two maybe. Some of the logistical challenges, just finding dates that we could get the most people involved, took some time. Then we did some evacuation drills, and the planning efforts really were not that significant to plan for those.
Yeah, I think it's significant to say, too, that we made a decision consciously to not only have a tabletop exercise, but also during the exercise to move to an alternate facility, which gave some realism to the tabletop that I don't always see in tabletop exercises for organizations. So it involved that movement and identifying the alternate site, which is an alternate site for FEA. So again, one of the important components was that we did use ISO 22398 guidelines for exercises, and so we were able not only to develop an exercise, it was called Hurricane Zoe, but also to put in place an exercise program, product to program, so that it's an ongoing activity with the organization. We have to have an exercise each year, and it has to be based on our business continuity plan.
Okay, we've gotten another one or two here. How wide of questions do you have for risks? For example, just facilities, or does it encompass DR crisis or DR/crisis communications?
I think Maureen can speak to the crisis communications plan as a component of the FEA's business continuity plan. We did get input from another individual in the organization on the steering committee who developed the crisis management plan. Maureen?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what's being asked there. Did we look at crisis communication threat?
Well, it just says how wide of, I presume, a range of questions do you have for risks? Does it encompass DR and crisis communications?
Yeah,
recovery.
Yeah,
right.
I would say it does. As George was mentioning, you know, we looked at threats to the facility, we looked at threats to the people, we looked at IT threats, we looked at supply chain threats, we looked at data threats, and we looked at communications in terms of how would we be able to communicate during a crisis. But, you know, again, organization, a small company, consulting firm, you know, our focus was on continuity of our business. We don't own any physical structures, and so through our risk assessment, we were always looking at what are the risks to our BIA prioritized processes or activities, and so how can we continue to function, and what are the risks associated that would impact us being able to continue to function.
Yeah, Jim, if the good answer, Maureen, and Jim, if the question has to do with the crisis communications plan, FEA did carefully look at the internal and external communications and pre-planned communications types, both internally and to suppliers and to the media, so that that content is in the plan, and it's also been rehearsed in the exercise.
Okay, how many tabletops do you perform? Just the strategic tactical level, or do departments have separate drills as well?
We just did the one company-wide tabletop.
Okay, and how often are your BIAs and risk assessments reviewed and updated?
So we have set it at that we would like to review it at a minimum. We would like to review it annually, but I think we set it on a 3-year cycle.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. George, that's the questions we have. Last comments from you and Maureen?
Thank you very much for all that you've done to host this, and thank you to the Association of Contingency Planners and Continuity Housing. And I know you're going to encourage people to fill out surveys, and I'm happy to see that we've had a lot of online attendees and certainly a good audience here in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Jim.
Well, thank you, George and Maureen, and also thanks to everyone who attended today. And as George just referred to, those of you watching online, we would appreciate it if you would stay on for just another minute or so and complete a very, very short survey to let us know what you thought of today's program. Thanks again to the National Geographic Society and the ACP Washington, D.C. chapter for their collaboration in making today's program available to ACP members across the country. We certainly appreciate that. And with that, we wish you all a very good day.